Ladies and gentlemen, divine trust trumps human logic. Trusting in divine guidance requires abandoning the need to see every step ahead. Faith isn't logical, it's spiritual, and you must learn to act without needing constant proof. Explained the divine trust trumps human logic. Silence is often misunderstood. In a world where noise dominates, where arguments are seen as strength and shouting is mistaken for power, silence is frequently interpreted as submission or weakness. But in reality, silence is one of the most powerful responses a person can choose, especially when it comes from a place of self-respect. When someone expects you to beg, to chase, or to prove your worth after they've wronged you or underestimated you, choosing silence instead becomes a profound statement. It's not about ignoring the situation or suppressing your emotions. It's about taking control of them. Silence is not about giving up. It's about rising above. It shows that you value your peace more than proving a point. When a person expects you to plead for their attention, they are feeding their ego. They want validation. They expect that their absence or mistreatment will push you into desperation. But when you respond with silence, you don't just deny them that validation, you force them to confront their own actions. You reflect their behavior back to them without using a single word. That reflection, that absence of reaction, is often louder than any confrontation. It shows that you know your worth and that your dignity is not for sale. There's also discipline in staying silent. It's easy to react impulsively, to send a message, to explain yourself, or to beg someone to see your value. But real strength lies in restraint. When you can hold back from reacting, when you can stay composed in the face of emotional manipulation, you display emotional maturity. Silence becomes a choice, not one made out of fear, but out of self-awareness. You're not avoiding the truth, you're protecting your peace. In many cases, silence is a boundary. It says, I will not engage in situations that devalue me. When you stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you, you begin to reclaim your power. You begin to understand that not everyone deserves access to your voice, your energy, or your time. That silence can become a shield, a quiet declaration that you will not be broken down by someone else's expectation. Silence allows space for reflection and growth. While someone else is occupied with their ego, wondering why you haven't reacted, why you haven't chased them, you're using that space to heal. You're not feeding the cycle of drama or emotional dependence. You're building yourself up quietly, patiently, and intentionally. And by the time they realize the depth of their mistake, your silence will have already said everything that needed to be said. So when someone thought you'd beg and you chose silence instead, you didn't just protect your peace, you shattered their illusion of control. That silence, rooted in self-respect and strength, speaks volumes. It's not emptiness, it's presence. A presence so strong it doesn't need to raise its voice to be heard. Ego is a fragile thing. It thrives on control, attention, and validation. When someone operates from ego, they often seek power over others, not through genuine connection, but through manipulation and dominance. They expect others to react to their actions in predictable ways, to argue, to explain, to plead, or to chase. That reaction feeds their ego and reinforces their sense of superiority. But when you refuse to play into that expectation, when you respond with stillness instead of desperation, you strip that ego of its power. You don't just ignore their behavior, you challenge the very foundation of it. Your silence, unexpected and unwavering, becomes the one thing their ego cannot handle. True strength doesn't come from controlling others, it comes from mastering yourself. The one who can stay calm in the face of manipulation, who can walk away instead of engaging in power games, is the one who is truly powerful. Ego demands attention, but strength thrives in independence. The person who thought you'd beg assumed you were emotionally dependent on their approval. They believed they had the upper hand. But when you chose silence over submission, they were left to face the discomfort of their own reflection without the distraction of your response. Ego is loud, it shouts to be heard, it demands recognition. But true strength is quiet. It doesn't need to announce itself. It's felt, not forced. When you remain silent in moments where others expect chaos, it unnerves them because they can't figure you out. They don't know what you're thinking, what you're planning, or how you're feeling, and that uncertainty weakens their sense of control. Their ego begins to crumble, not because you fought back, but because you didn't give them what they expected. It's easy to believe that to prove your worth, you must defend yourself, that you must correct the lies, argue the unfairness, or plead for understanding. But when you truly understand your value, you realize that none of those things are necessary. The people who matter won't need you to explain yourself, and the ones who try to manipulate you aren't interested in understanding you anyway. The person who expected you to beg was operating from ego, not love. And your silence revealed that. It forced a confrontation with their own behavior, something they may have been avoiding for a long time. By refusing to react, you shine a light on the hollowness of ego. You expose how shallow that power is when it's not met with submission. And in doing so, you remind yourself and them that real power comes from within. It doesn't demand, it doesn't control, and it certainly doesn't beg. So when you stayed silent instead of pleading, you didn't lose, you rose. You didn't abandon the conversation, you transcended it. You didn't damage their ego maliciously, you simply stopped feeding it. And in that moment, your silence became the loudest truth they could ever hear. Emotional intelligence is one of the most important skills a person can develop, especially when it comes to navigating relationships and moments of conflict. It's not about denying your emotions, but about understanding and managing them in a healthy, productive way. When someone expects you to react emotionally, whether it's with anger, sadness, desperation, or pleading, they are counting on your lack of control. They are relying on your emotions to cloud your judgment. But when you respond with silence, with calm, with intention, you are demonstrating a high level of emotional intelligence that completely disarms their strategy. People who try to provoke a reaction are often testing your limits. They want to see how much control they can exert over your feelings, but emotional intelligence allows you to pause, to assess the situation, and to decide if it's even worth your energy. Silence is not always a lack of response. It is often a conscious decision to respond in a way that protects your peace. It tells the other person, you do not get to dictate my emotional state. That is power. That is wisdom. Emotional reactivity, on the other hand, gives others control. It means you are responding based on impulse, not intention. And when you do that, you allow someone else to lead the situation. But when you've developed emotional intelligence, you know how to sit with your feelings without letting them lead you. You know how to express your truth without begging for understanding. You become less interested in being right and more focused on being grounded. That shift is where growth begins. Your silence is often misunderstood by those who expect drama. They see it as cold, distant, or even weak, but in reality, it's the opposite. It takes incredible strength to not respond when you are hurt, to not chase someone who mistreated you, and to not explain yourself to someone who isn't truly listening. That kind of restraint comes from emotional intelligence, not pride, not fear, but wisdom. You know that not every battle is worth fighting. You know that some people don't want resolution, they want control. And the moment you recognize that, you take back your power by simply refusing to play the game. Over time, emotional intelligence teaches you that you don't need closure from another person to move forward. You don't need their apology or their validation. You just need clarity within yourself. And silence gives you the space to find that clarity. While they're waiting for a reaction, confused by your calmness, You're healing, you're growing, you're learning, and most importantly, you're protecting your emotional energy for people and situations that are worthy of it. So when someone expects you to react, and instead you choose silence, you are practicing one of the highest forms of emotional maturity. You are leading with self-respect instead of ego, intention instead of impulse, and strength instead of vulnerability to manipulation. In doing so, you show that you are not just reacting to life, you are consciously creating your place in it. Disengagement is often misunderstood as avoidance or weakness, but in truth, it can be one of the most powerful and healing decisions a person can make. When someone mistreats you, disrespects your boundaries, or plays mind games in an attempt to provoke an emotional reaction, the instinct might be to fight back, to confront, or to explain. But not every battle deserves your energy. Walking away without the need to argue, without the desire to be understood by someone who never intended to understand you, is a bold act of self-preservation. It's a conscious choice to prioritize your healing over their ego. Silence is not the absence of emotion, it is the presence of strength. It's the refusal to let someone else's chaos dictate your inner world. When you disengage, you are saying, I will no longer participate in cycles that hurt me. That decision alone can change everything. It shifts the dynamic. The person who thought they had power over you suddenly realizes that their words, their silence, their manipulation, none of it holds weight anymore. And that realization is powerful, not only for them, but more importantly, for you. Healing doesn't always come with closure. Sometimes it comes with distance. It comes from choosing not to respond to messages that aim to confuse you, not showing up where you're only tolerated, and not pouring energy into relationships that leave you feeling drained. Disengagement allows you to reclaim your time, your peace, and your sense of self. When you stop trying to fix people or situations that aren't interested in growth, you start focusing on your own. You begin to heal not by changing others, but by releasing the idea that you ever could. There's a quiet kind of liberation in walking away without causing a scene. It says you're done explaining your worth, done proving your loyalty, done fighting for a seat at a table where you're not valued. And in that silence, you begin to hear yourself more clearly. You recognize patterns, you realize what you truly deserve, and you give yourself permission to create space for better. Some people expect a dramatic goodbye. They anticipate a breakdown, a confrontation, a final attempt to make things right. But when you disengage without warning, without pleading, and without resentment, it unsettles them, because your silence speaks a truth they didn't prepare for, that your healing no longer involves them, and that realization stings far more than any argument would have. Walking away isn't about bitterness, it's about clarity. It's about acknowledging that peace is more important than proving a point. It's about valuing yourself enough to know that being misunderstood by someone who doesn't respect you is not your burden to carry. So when you choose to disengage, when you choose silence over chaos, you are not running from pain, you are running toward healing. And in that decision, you reclaim your power, your voice, and most importantly, your peace. Closure is often seen as something we must receive from others, a final conversation, an apology, an explanation that ties up all the loose ends. But in truth, closure is not something you are given. It is something you create for yourself. It doesn't require the presence or participation of the person who hurt you. It doesn't depend on whether they admit their faults or offer you the validation you hoped for. Sometimes the most powerful form of closure comes in silence, when you stop waiting for answers and start trusting your own decision to move on. When someone wrongs you or walks away without clarity, the natural human instinct is to seek understanding. We want to know why, we want the other person to acknowledge what they did and in some way justify our pain. But not everyone is willing or capable of giving us that. And when you continue to chase closure from someone who cannot or will not give it, you prolong your healing. You hand them the power to define when and how you'll find peace. That's why choosing to create your own closure without explanations or final words becomes an act of self-empowerment. Silence can be painful, especially when it feels unfinished, but silence can also be incredibly clear. It tells you everything you need to know, not because of what's said, but because of what isn't. When someone chooses not to acknowledge you, not to take responsibility, or not to show up when it matters, that is your answer. You don't need to beg for it. You don't need to force it. Your choice to stop chasing and start accepting is where closure begins. You stop looking outward for peace and start building it within yourself. Letting go without confrontation is not weakness, it's wisdom. It means you've realized that not every story needs a perfect ending. Sometimes the most powerful ending is the one you write in silence by choosing yourself. The moment you decide that you no longer need their version of the truth to validate your experience, you reclaim your strength. You recognize that you can still grow despite the break. Closure is not about getting someone else to see your worth. It's about remembering it for yourself. It's choosing not to reopen wounds just to make someone else feel better. It's saying, even without your apology, I choose to forgive, not for you, but for my own peace. That's what silence does. It creates space for reflection, for healing, and for resolution that doesn't depend on anyone else's permission. So when you let go without explaining, when you walk away without a final conversation, and when you stop waiting for someone to give you peace, you've already found it, you realize that the most powerful closure doesn't come from someone else's mouth. It comes from your own heart deciding it's time to move forward. And in that quiet, you find your strength, your healing, and the freedom to begin again. Self-worth is the foundation of every healthy decision you make, especially in relationships. When you choose not to beg, plead, or chase after someone who expected you to, you are making a powerful statement about how much you value yourself. You are telling the world, and more importantly yourself, that your worth is not up for debate. It doesn't depend on someone else's approval, attention, or acceptance. When someone treats you in a way that makes you feel small, ignored, or disposable, and you respond not with desperation but with dignity, that is where real transformation begins. Many people operate under the illusion that love or connection means fighting to be seen, proving your loyalty, or enduring mistreatment just to keep someone around, but that belief is rooted in insecurity, not strength. When you truly recognize your value, you understand that anyone who genuinely respects and cares for you would never put you in a position where you feel you must beg to be acknowledged. You begin to realize that the love you accept is a direct reflection of the love you believe you deserve. Choosing silence over begging is not just about the other person, it's a mirror of your inner growth. It means you have reached a place where peace is more valuable than attention, where walking away is no longer a sign of giving up, but a sign of rising up. You are no longer chasing people who can't see your worth because you have finally decided to see it for yourself. And once you do, everything changes. The energy you once spent trying to convince others to stay is now invested in building yourself, in protecting your heart, and in surrounding yourself with people who choose you without hesitation. This choice also creates a new standard. When you rise through self-worth, you naturally elevate the kind of treatment you are willing to accept. You no longer settle for breadcrumbs of affection. You no longer wait around for someone to remember your value. You are no longer afraid to be alone because you have learned that solitude is far better than being with someone who makes you feel invisible. And the more you honor yourself, the more you attract relationships and situations that align with that level of respect. There's also a quiet confidence that comes with knowing you didn't have to degrade yourself to make a point, that you didn't have to scream, cry, or plead for someone to realize what they had. Your silence wasn't an absence, it was a boundary, a declaration that you know who you are and that your worth doesn't decrease because someone failed to see it. In fact, their failure becomes a reflection of them, not of you. So when you chose not to beg, you didn't just protect your dignity, you elevated it. You taught yourself that real love doesn't require you to sacrifice your self-respect. And in doing so, you became stronger, wiser, and more aligned with the version of yourself that no longer waits to be chosen but chooses themselves first.